You've been told your entire life that being anti-capitalist makes you naive, idealistic, unrealistic, a dreamer who doesn't understand how the world really works. You've been convinced that capitalism, despite its flaws, is the most practical system we have, that any alternative is utopian fantasy, that critique without immediate solutions is pointless intellectual masturbation. But what if I told you that this accusation of idealism is itself the greatest idealism of our time? What if defending capitalism in the face of climate collapse, mass extinction, endless war, and planetary-scale inequality is the most unrealistic position imaginable? Fredric Jameson, the towering Marxist cultural critic who has spent decades dissecting the ideology of late capitalism, reveals a truth so disturbing that the entire intellectual establishment conspires to suppress it. In our current historical moment, anti-capitalism isn't idealistic. It's the only rational response to objective reality. Defending capitalism isn't realism. It's psychotic delusion on a civilizational scale. Jameson understands something that explodes every comfortable assumption about political realism. We live in a moment when the supposedly realistic position, maintaining capitalism, is actually impossible, while the supposedly impossible position, transcending capitalism, is the only realistic option for human survival. This isn't philosophical speculation. It's empirical analysis of objective conditions. Look at climate change through Jameson's lens. The scientific consensus is clear. Avoiding catastrophic warming requires rapid decarbonization on a scale incompatible with capitalism's requirement for endless growth. Every climate model that keeps warming below catastrophic levels requires economic transformation that capitalism cannot accomplish without ceasing to be capitalism. Maintaining the current economic system means accepting planetary destruction. Defending capitalism is defending extinction. But here's where Jameson's analysis becomes truly radical. The impossibility isn't just environmental. It's social, political, and psychological. Capitalism has created contradictions that cannot be resolved within its own framework. Technological unemployment threatens to make human labor obsolete, while the system requires mass employment to function. Financial speculation has created debt bubbles that dwarf the real economy. Inequality has reached levels that threaten social stability. The system is eating itself. Jameson sees that what we call realism in political discourse is actually a form of idealism. The idealistic belief that somehow these contradictions will resolve themselves, that somehow the system will reform itself, that somehow catastrophe can be avoided without fundamental change. This isn't realism. It's magical thinking disguised as pragmatism. The truly realistic position is recognizing that capitalism has become incompatible with human survival, and that some form of post-capitalist organization is not just desirable but necessary. Anti-capitalism isn't idealistic yearning for a perfect world. It's rational response to empirical evidence that the current world is killing us. This reversal of realism and idealism is Jameson's most important insight. In periods of systemic crisis, maintaining the status quo becomes the most unrealistic position possible, while radical transformation becomes the only rational option. We're living through such a period right now. Jameson's analysis of late capitalism reveals how the system maintains itself not through force or even propaganda, but through the colonization of imagination itself. The most successful ideological operation in human history is the production of what he calls anti-utopian sentiment, the systematic destruction of the capacity to imagine alternatives to capitalism. This operates through what Margaret Thatcher crystallized as "there is no alternative." Not just the claim that capitalism is the best system, but that it's the only possible system. This isn't argued rationally. It's installed as an unconscious assumption that shapes thought before thought even begins. Alternative economic arrangements become literally unthinkable, not because they've been refuted, but because the conceptual frameworks for thinking them have been eliminated. Jameson shows how this ideological closure operates through multiple mechanisms. Historical amnesia erases memory of non-capitalist societies that actually existed and functioned. The collapse of actually existing socialism is used to discredit not just specific socialist experiments, but the very possibility of systematic alternatives to capitalism. Market logic is universalized as human nature, making competition and individualism seem like eternal truths rather than historical developments. But perhaps most insidiously, the system encourages endless criticism of capitalism's effects, while making criticism of capitalism itself seem naive. You can critique inequality, environmental destruction, war, alienation, as long as you don't connect these problems to the systemic logic that produces them. You can be as radical as you want about symptoms while remaining conservative about causes. This creates what Jameson calls the political unconscious, a form of consciousness that can see everything except the system that determines what can be seen. You can analyze endless details about how capitalism functions while being unable to imagine that it might not function at all. The system becomes like the air you breathe, invisible because it's everywhere. Jameson's masterwork, Postmodernism, or The Cultural Logic of Late Capitalism, reveals how contemporary culture doesn't just reflect capitalism. It actively reproduces the psychological conditions necessary for capitalism's survival. What we call postmodern culture is actually capitalism's cultural immune system, protecting it from critique by fragmenting consciousness and eliminating historical perspective. Consider how postmodern culture operates. Everything becomes pastiche, endless recycling of previous styles without historical understanding of what those styles meant. History flattens into a grab bag of aesthetic options. The past becomes costume, politics becomes performance, resistance becomes style. You can consume the aesthetics of revolution without ever encountering revolutionary content. This cultural fragmentation serves a crucial function. It prevents the development of historical consciousness necessary for systematic critique. When everything is equally available as aesthetic choice, nothing has historical weight. When all periods are equally present, no period has causal relationship to any other. When all positions are equally valid lifestyle options, no position can claim objective truth about social reality. Jameson shows how this affects political consciousness. Postmodern culture produces subjects who can hold multiple contradictory positions simultaneously without experiencing contradiction. You can be environmentalist and consumer, anti-racist and gentrifier, feminist and consumer of sexualized imagery, anti-capitalist and entrepreneur. These contradictions don't create psychological tension because postmodern consciousness has eliminated the demand for coherence. This fragmentation extends to temporal experience. Late capitalism operates through what Jameson calls perpetual present, the elimination of historical time in favor of eternal now. You lose connection to past struggles and future possibilities, trapped in immediate consumption of present experience. Revolution becomes impossible not because it's impractical, but because the temporal framework necessary for revolutionary thinking has been destroyed. One of Jameson's most disturbing insights is how late capitalism has achieved something that fascism only dreamed of: the complete aestheticization of political life. Politics becomes entertainment. Political positions become lifestyle choices. Political engagement becomes consumer preference. this doesn't just depoliticize aesthetics. It eliminates politics altogether by transforming it into culture. Look at how political discourse operates today. Politicians are evaluated like entertainers based on their performance rather than their policies. Political positions are adopted like fashion choices based on how they make you feel, rather than their material consequences. Political engagement happens through consumption of political content, rather than collective action for political change. This aestheticization serves multiple functions for capitalism. It channels political energy into harmless cultural activities. It transforms collective struggles into individual consumer choices. It makes political critique into entertainment that can be monetized rather than resistance that threatens power. You can consume revolutionary content without engaging in revolutionary activity. Jameson sees that this process reaches its apotheosis in what he calls the society of the spectacle, borrowing from Guy Debord, but extending the analysis to show how spectacle becomes the primary mechanism for organizing social reality under late capitalism. Politics doesn't just become spectacle, spectacle becomes politics. The representation of political activity becomes more important than political activity itself. This creates what Jameson calls pseudo-politics, frenetic activity that feels like political engagement but serves to prevent actual political change. You can spend enormous amounts of time and energy on political activity that has no material consequences beyond making you feel politically engaged. The system benefits from this pseudo-politics because it absorbs political energy while ensuring that energy doesn't threaten actual power structures. Jameson's approach to cultural analysis reveals how capitalism operates through what he calls strategies of containment, cultural mechanisms that acknowledge problems while preventing the development of consciousness that could address those problems systematically. Every critique of capitalism gets absorbed and neutralized by cultural forms that preserve capitalism while appearing to challenge it. Consider how this operates in contemporary film and literature. Anti-capitalist themes are everywhere in popular culture, but they're presented in ways that prevent systematic critique. Corporate dystopias are depicted as the result of individual evil rather than systemic logic. Environmental destruction is shown as the consequence of human nature rather than specific economic arrangements. Social problems are personalized rather than politicized. This creates what Jameson calls the political unconscious of cultural production, the systematic exclusion of class analysis and economic causation from cultural representation. Culture can show you endless symptoms of capitalist pathology while making the cause invisible. You can consume endless critiques of capitalism that never quite become critiques of capitalism. Jameson's hermeneutics of suspicion means reading cultural texts for what they don't say rather than what they do say. The most important thing about any cultural product under capitalism is what it must exclude to exist within capitalist cultural production. The systematic absences reveal more about social reality than the conscious content. This approach extends to academic and intellectual discourse. Universities can house endless criticism of capitalism's effects, while systematically excluding perspectives that question capitalism's existence. Intellectual critique becomes a form of system maintenance rather than system challenge. The university becomes capitalism's think tank for managing its own contradictions, rather than a space for imagining alternatives. Jameson reveals how technology under capitalism operates through what he calls dialectical reversal. Tools that could liberate human potential are systematically deployed to enhance human subjugation. This isn't accidental or the result of bad choices. It's the inevitable consequence of developing technology within capitalist social relations. Consider artificial intelligence and automation. These technologies could eliminate most repetitive labor and create unprecedented abundance for human flourishing. But under capitalism, they become weapons for eliminating workers and concentrating wealth. The same technologies that could liberate humanity from drudgery become mechanisms for making human beings obsolete to the production process, while maintaining their dependence on that process for survival. This dialectical reversal extends to communication technology. The Internet could enable democratic participation and collective intelligence on unprecedented scales. But under capitalism, it becomes a surveillance apparatus and manipulation machine that fragments attention and destroys the conditions for democratic discourse. Social media could enable genuine community formation, but instead creates addiction and isolation. Jameson sees that this isn't about technology itself, but about the social relations within which technology develops. Capitalist technology is designed to increase productivity and reduce labor costs, not to enhance human potential or solve social problems. Technologies that can't be monetized don't get developed, regardless of their potential social benefit. Technologies that threaten capitalist social relations get suppressed or redirected. This analysis reveals why technological solutions to social problems consistently fail under capitalism. You can't solve climate change with green technology while maintaining an economic system that requires endless growth. You can't solve inequality with educational technology while maintaining an economic system that requires inequality to function. You can't solve democratic deficits with communication technology while maintaining an economic system that concentrates power in private hands. One of Jameson's most important concepts is cognitive mapping, the ability to understand your position within the total social system and to grasp the connections between local experience and global structure. Late capitalism systematically destroys this capacity, creating subjects who can experience effects without understanding causes, symptoms without grasping systems. This operates through what Jameson calls the crisis of representation, the impossibility of representing the totality of late capitalist social relations within existing cultural forms. The system has become too complex, too dispersed, too abstract to be comprehended through traditional modes of understanding. You can experience your exploitation without being able to locate the exploiter. You can suffer from systemic dysfunction without being able to identify the system. Jameson shows how this creates a specific form of political paralysis. Without cognitive mapping, resistance becomes impossible because you can't identify what you're resisting. You can feel that something is wrong without being able to specify what's wrong or imagine what would be better. Political energy dissipates into generalized anxiety and cultural symptomatology. The development of cognitive mapping requires what Jameson calls class consciousness. Not just awareness of your economic position, but understanding of how that position fits within total social relations. This consciousness has become extremely difficult to develop because the mechanisms that once produced it, collective work, stable communities, shared cultural references, have been systematically destroyed by late capitalism. Jameson's project is developing new forms of cultural analysis that can restore cognitive mapping capacity. This requires moving beyond individualistic psychology and cultural relativism towards systematic analysis of how consciousness is shaped by economic structures. It means connecting personal experience to historical process and local symptoms to global causes. Contrary to his reputation as a pessimistic critic, Jameson's work is fundamentally about recovering what he calls the utopian impulse, the human capacity to imagine and work toward qualitatively different forms of social organization. This impulse exists within every cultural product, every political movement, every moment of resistance. but it's systematically suppressed by capitalism's anti-utopian ideology. Jameson distinguishes between utopian programs, specific blueprints for future society, and utopian impulse, the deeper human drive toward transcendence of current limitations. The impulse is more important than the programs because it's what motivates all genuine social transformation. Without utopian impulse, political activity becomes mere system maintenance rather than system transcendence. Late capitalism works to suppress this impulse not by prohibiting utopian thinking, but by co-opting and commodifying it. Utopian energy gets channeled into consumer choice, technological fetishism, and lifestyle modification, rather than systematic social transformation. You can buy utopian products, consume utopian entertainment, and adopt utopian identities without engaging in utopian politics. Jameson's analysis reveals how to distinguish genuine utopian impulse from its commodified substitutes. Genuine utopianism always involves collective transformation rather than individual optimization. It always requires systematic change rather than technological solutions. It always challenges property relations rather than working within market mechanisms. The recovery of utopian impulse is crucial for developing anti-capitalist consciousness because it provides the imaginative framework necessary for systematic alternatives. Without utopian vision, critique remains trapped within capitalist assumptions even when it opposes capitalist practices. Jameson's ultimate insight is that history itself has a political unconscious, suppressed possibilities that haunt every historical moment and create the potential for revolutionary transformation. These possibilities aren't visible within dominant consciousness, but can be recovered through what he calls symptomal reading. Attention to contradictions, gaps, and tensions that reveal alternative trajectories. Every historical moment contains what wasn't realized, roads not taken, movements that were defeated, possibilities that were suppressed. These alternatives don't disappear. They remain as unconscious pressures that create instability within dominant arrangements. Revolutionary moments are when these suppressed possibilities suddenly become visible and actionable. Jameson shows how this operates in cultural analysis. Every cultural product contains utopian elements that point beyond current reality, even when the conscious content supports current reality. The detective novel contains implicit critique of social investigation. The romance contains implicit critique of emotional poverty under capitalism. Science fiction contains implicit critique of technological irrationality. This symptomal reading reveals that anti-capitalist consciousness isn't imported from outside existing culture. It's already present within existing culture as its unconscious content. The task isn't creating new consciousness, but recovering consciousness that's been suppressed. Revolution doesn't require converting people to new ideas, but helping them recognize ideas they already have, but can't yet articulate. The political unconscious of our current moment is structured by the contradiction between capitalism's requirement for endless growth and the planet's finite resources, between technological capacity for abundance and economic requirement for scarcity, between democratic aspirations and oligarchic reality. These contradictions create pressures that make revolutionary transformation not just possible, but inevitable. So here's the truth that Fredric Jameson has spent decades articulating through massive theoretical constructions and microscopic cultural analysis. Anti-capitalism isn't idealistic yearning for impossible perfection. It's rational response to empirical evidence that capitalism has become incompatible with human survival and flourishing. The accusation of idealism is itself the most dangerous idealism of our time. Believing that somehow capitalism can be reformed, that somehow its contradictions will resolve themselves, that somehow catastrophe can be avoided without systematic change. This is magical thinking disguised as realism. The truly idealistic position is faith that a system based on endless growth can somehow coexist with finite planetary resources. Anti-capitalism is realistic because it's based on objective analysis of objective conditions. Climate science demonstrates that capitalism's growth requirement is incompatible with ecological survival. Economic analysis demonstrates that capitalism's inequality is incompatible with democratic governance. Technological analysis demonstrates that capitalism's scarcity requirements are incompatible with abundance possibilities. Social analysis demonstrates that capitalism's competitive logic is incompatible with cooperative human nature. But Jameson's analysis goes deeper than this. He shows that capitalist realism isn't just wrong empirically, it's psychologically and culturally destructive. The system maintains itself by destroying the human capacity for imagination, hope, and collective action. It creates subjects who can see problems but can't imagine solutions, who can experience oppression but can't conceive liberation, who can suffer from the system but can't think beyond the system. Recovering revolutionary consciousness isn't about accepting impractical utopian schemes. It's about restoring basic human capacities that capitalism has systematically damaged. The capacity to think historically, the capacity to imagine alternatives, the capacity to connect personal experience to social structure, the capacity to distinguish what's natural from what's historical, the capacity to hope for qualitative transformation rather than just quantitative improvement. This recovery is already happening everywhere, often in ways that don't announce themselves as anti-capitalist. Climate activism that connects environmental destruction to economic logic. Labor organizing that challenges managerial prerogatives. Community organizing that creates alternative economic relationships. Cultural work that expands imagination beyond market categories. Jameson's framework helps us recognize that these seemingly separate activities are aspects of a single historical process, the emergence of post-capitalist consciousness that will eventually create post-capitalist reality. This isn't inevitable in the sense of predetermined, but it's inevitable in the sense that capitalism's contradictions make its transcendence necessary for human survival. The choice isn't between realistic acceptance of capitalism and idealistic resistance to capitalism. The choice is between idealistic defense of a dying system and realistic preparation for the system that must replace it. Anti-capitalism isn't utopianism. It's rational planning for human survival in the 21st century. Jameson offers no blueprint for post-capitalist society because blueprints are less important than processes. The consciousness that can create alternatives to capitalism is more important than specific alternatives to capitalism. The capacity for collective imagination is more important than particular imaginative products. The revolution isn't coming from outside current reality. It's emerging from within current reality as its unconscious content becomes conscious, as its suppressed possibilities become actualized, as its contradictions become productive rather than destructive. Your task isn't to believe in revolution, but to recognize the revolutionary implications of what you already know. Stop apologizing for being anti-capitalist. Start recognizing that anti-capitalism is the only rational response to irrational reality. The future depends on this recognition becoming as widespread as the problems that make it necessary.